Well, it's really a pleasure to have you here. We should be connecting momentarily, so we are about to go live.
Okay.
Hello, David. Welcome. How are you?
I'm great. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And we are very excited for those who are joining in. This is Catherine Pichardo, President and CEO at Latino Victory. We are honored to have today David Pepper join us, who's an attorney, writer, political activist, former elected official, adjunct professor, and former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party. Join us today for Real Talk on politics, Latinos, and how we get Democrats back together. So, without further ado, I want to welcome you again, David, and ask because a lot of times I say to folks, I've been in politics a long time, although folks always ask, well, you don't look that old. So I see, I like that part. But you and I have been in business for about the same time. I always say Nidia Velasquez 1998 was my first race, and I haven't had a year off since. Tell me a little bit about you, how you entered into
Sure.
politics. Tell me your story.
Did you say Alaska 1998?
Nidia Velasquez 1998.
Oh, gotcha. I so my first race was 2000, and I ran for Cincinnati City Council in Cincinnati. I had moved back here. I lived out east. I lived in Washington for a bit. I lived in New York. I went to law school, and I got back here, and the city that I had been so proud of my whole life, Cincinnati, was really struggling. I knew nothing about politics. I had really not been involved. I was a lawyer. I had worked overseas for some time, and I moved back, and I kind of naively just thought, "Oh, I think I can do better than the current city council members." And so I just started running without any real background, no consultants or anything. And in for me, it worked because I think I was so obviously new, and it was a time where Cincinnati wanted change, and all I knew how to do was work hard, knock on doors. I didn't knock on just the doors of someone who voted every time. I knocked on any door. I didn't care who you were. I'd go anywhere and knock on wood. I finished first out of 30 because I was just so obviously not some longtime political person, and
You
I've
weren't
been
the usual
involved in ever since.
politician.
Yeah,
You
I was
weren't the
not a
usual
politician.
politician.
And I probably made I was a Democrat, but I wasn't that partisan. So I think probably half the Democrats didn't like me because I was saying we could do better. We had and on a serious note, we had serious police community relations problems that led to fatal police shootings, and there was a lot of angst about our city and where it was going. And I think being a fresh face who was promising to do better was what people wanted. So my campaign hit at a very time where people wanted new, and I managed to win then. And to me, I ran because this was public service. It wasn't, I wasn't running. And frankly, I'd work with anybody. I didn't care what party you were. And in many ways, even though it doesn't feel that long ago to me, it was a different era where politics did feel more like public service, and it was at a time where you really could still find ways to work across the aisle on big issues. And I look now, and it really is sad to see that moment where I entered feels so much better then than what we experience now. So that was how I got my start.
And a lot of times, folks might say that politics right now feels very polarizing. So to
Yeah.
exactly your point, you feel like it was a different time, but you being the fresh face was appealing. What were some of the challenges though? Because I feel like most folks who get into politics don't start out saying to themselves, I want to be in politics.
Right.
However, once they come in, and as you mentioned, it becomes public service, right? That you start to really get the big picture of what infrastructure looks like, what the
Right.
bureaucracy looks like. And I imagine there were challenges as you came in to figure out how to execute your policy agenda. So, how did that
Yeah.
work out?
In a way, like it was good I didn't know what I didn't know. Like I was literally, in movie Forrest Gump, he just ran. That was kind of me. I was just running. I was naive about it. in a way that was good. I didn't have any polling. I made up my slogan, just add pepper. I put it on every yard sign. Everybody knew it. And in a way that was helpful because I think in hindsight, for those who are watching, thinking about running, the hardest thing in many ways is the first run for office. What is the depending on where you live, it could be really crowded, or maybe you are a Democrat in a very conservative area. So I was fortunate that I was running in a place that was open to a new person. I was a complete outsider. And so I think not knowing how hard it was, it almost made it easier for me to just do it. I also think one of the things that I've learned that I think is also hard, and by the way, one of my best pieces of advice for anyone who ever wants to run: early, start early. I started very early, and in hindsight, that made a big difference about how someone brand new could get to out in the community enough. Every community council I could get to, I'd go 2 or 3 times, tens of thousands of doors knocked. The only reason that worked for me is because I started earlier than everybody else by far, and especially as a new person, that matters. Otherwise, when everyone else already's entered, you're too late. The other thing I think is a challenge is some people, and I don't mean to criticize, but some people, once they get into office, they forget who they are or they change. I mean, you've probably seen it. And I think it's hard, it's hard to watch sometimes, but I've seen people who once they won, they forgot why they ran. They get isolated at their city hall or their state house. And I think that's the other thing that gets underestimated is how easy it is for politics to take you off in directions about who you are, what you care about, that that are different from how you started. So one of the things I always tried to do once I got there, and even a city hall can be removed from the people if you're not careful. If you're just having these big meetings and fancy people meeting with you, it's easy to forget what everyday people want. So one thing I would do is, even when it wasn't a campaign year, I'd go back out and knock on doors because it kept me real, and I never felt more in tune than when I was talking to everyday people on a regular basis, not telling them why to vote for me, but actually listening to them. And so that, I think one of the hard things about politics is once you get into the state house or city hall or wherever, Congress, probably even harder, it's easy to kind of lose track of who you are and why you went there. And so start early to run, but once you get there, remember why you went and build into your day to day things that make it so that you're reminded every day about why you did it in the first place, and not change, which I've seen some people do, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And, as someone who's also advised a lot of elected officials and politicians, folks running for office in the past, I agree, couldn't agree more with you in start early, but also just keep pounding the pavement. You cannot overstate the importance of field in every type of race,
Yeah.
even for Congress or President of the United States. It looks a little different than if it was school board, but certainly field is king. um, I would say, as a PAC and as an organization that supports candidates up and down the ballot, we always make the distinction of why local races matter. And much has been said about the presidential election last year. We're going to talk a little bit about that and where Democrats are and how we move forward. But I love the fact that you started in local office. And I know you have your book, Laboratories in Autocracy, that received lots of fanfare and attention. Um, Tell me why state legislatures are so
Yeah.
important, and let's talk about Ohio too.
Sure.
Why do you think it's a cautionary tale?
Yeah. Well, first, the main reason that I think local office matters is for the reason I ran it. It is direct service.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're in politics for the right reason, which is serving, school board, local councils, county commission, as a county commissioner, you can do so much good. It may not get you in the newspaper, you may not be on MSNBC, but like I look back to my days at City Hall in the county, and there are so many things that I now feel honored that I was able to do. So I would say the first thing is just the service you get to do, which is why I hope people do politics in the first place. But what I learned over time, because I kind of entered, as I said, somewhat apolitically, and this explains so much of what's happened in America for the last several decades. State houses, in particular, in many ways, are the key to the entire American democracy, experiment.
Mhm.
State houses write the rules of voting, who gets to vote, how they register, how can they be purged. And state houses draw the district lines. So we can either have fair elections and represent democracy, or we can have gerrymandering. And the control of state houses going back centuries has determined how broad and inclusive our democracy is, or if we just shut it down, like we saw with Jim Crow. That has
Mhm.
usually been through state houses and not Congress. It's just, and that's how it was designed going back to the founding. So the worry is, and this is why I wrote these books that are sort of like trying to be wake up calls to people, when we as Democrats have forgotten that, while Republicans and groups like ALEC and the Koch brothers have focused like a laser on locking down power in state houses, including in blue states, like a Michigan or Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin, or Ohio. Only a few years after Obama won those states, the reason they have done so much damage to democracy is less because of Marjorie Taylor Greene and more because of hundreds of people just like her in state houses who we've never heard of, who we don't focus on, who are passing laws every day that run down democracy and push through an extremist agenda, like what led to Dobbs, or going after public education, or any of it. So state houses are really where so much of the action is. But if one side is focused on them and using them to do all that damage, and the other side only really gets excited about a few federal races, as I write in my books, who's going to win? Well, the side that's focusing on those state houses. So, and Ohio is a cautionary tale. I mean, I just wrote about something this morning on this. Obama won Ohio with about a 4 or 5 point margin.
Mm.
In 2008, after that election, Ohio had um, 10 Democratic members of Congress and 8 Republicans. Karl Rove in 2010 went for broke to win the Ohio State House. Then they gerrymandered, and they purged, and they clamped down on early vote. And with that state house power, not a single thing from Congress did this. With that state house power, 2 years later, Ohio's congressional membership was 12 Republicans and 4 Democrats. Even
Mhm.
though Obama won the state by the same he won 4 years ago,
Right.
the gerrymandering switched it all. And we have been living through an anti-democracy hell ever since. And it all started with them. And I was a candidate in 2010. I ended up running statewide a couple times. In 2010, we were so focused on federal Washington Obama stuff that we didn't show up in the 2010 elections. They did. They crushed us in states like Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and we've been living with that ever since. So we're the cautionary tale that if your state was blue, which we were, and that coalition is still sort of there, but it's massively suppressed and it's gerrymandered. If they get their hands on these state house levers over democracy, they can take us and then push extremism again and again on everything. They can take a state that was a swing state that was blue in a good year and turn it into what they have. So we are a real cautionary tale on what can happen if your state house is extreme for an extended period of time. And that's
And
true of Missouri, Tennessee, and other states as well.
and
Florida.
and we're seeing it play out in real time in Texas right now, right? With the
Exactly.
proposal for
Yeah.
redistricting. And to have a president of the United States that very openly is encouraging it,
Yeah.
so they could win 5 congressional seats. Hello, talk about
Yeah.
being out in the open on
And they're
Jeremy.
doing it in Ohio. In Ohio right now, they are in some hotel room or law firm somewhere doing the same thing. Right now, we are 10-5, and they are going to try and make it 12-3 or 13-2. Same thing. And it's all violates the Ohio Constitution. But in states like Ohio, they basically get away with breaking the law on a regular basis. So they're doing the same thing here they are in Texas.
And when you have a Supreme Court that's controlled by right wing
Yes,
folks, we do have a real constitutional crisis.
we
Um,
do.
so I want to move to Latino voters, and as you know, Latino Victory's mission is to build Latino political power, not just electing Latino Democrats up and down the ballot, but also really building Latino voter infrastructure that can help Democrats win races, even in seats where non-Latinos are running.
Right.
Um, You've written that Democrats need to stop playing defense and go on offense, right? Run more candidates, register non voters, stay engaged, even in deep red districts. What's your thought on their outreach to Latino voters as a potential make or break um, electorate in many of the districts that we see now are battlegrounds?
Yeah, I mean, my thought is, and you obviously are the expert more than but we have a sizable and what could be the difference in election size Latino population in Ohio. About 5% of the population, and in some communities, much larger than that. So it could make a difference in state house races and in a close statewide race, including, by the way, I think there's a real opportunity, there could be, to win the Ohio Senate seat back in 2026. We've got to do everything right, including maximizing turnout and margins with Latino voters. I'm a big believer that so much of this stuff has to be community based, that too often the Democratic Party sort of parachutes in with national databases and statewide databases, and we just sort of call into communities without ever getting into the community. And so my guess is that our different, large pockets of Latinos in Ohio, the single best approach would be start from the community and up rather than top down, and have local respected leaders of that community be the best messengers. Be the ones that are organizing the discussions at the door. I mean, no offense to like an intern from a college far away knocking on those doors. I'd love to have anyone doing it. But if the more we harness the communities themselves to be the precinct executives and the people door knocking and the regional organizers, I just think we'll do whether it's registering to vote, whether it's using community-based organizations to do the registration as well versus simply the county Democratic Party. The more we're community-based with people who have credibility in the community on organizing, on voter registration, and ultimately on messaging about why a candidate that's on the ballot is the best one for you and your community, the better off we'll do. And I think we don't do that as well now as we should. And I also think, and this is an age-old problem, I think so much of what happens wrong is we treat voters as monoliths. We assume they're automatically Democrats, which is clearly not the case. And we assume that if all we do is knock on a door with 2 weeks to go saying, "Oh my gosh, it's an important election, show up," that that's going to do the trick. A lot of people in America, including voters of color, including Latinos, democracy doesn't feel like it's worked out that well for them.
Right.
So we can't just assume a desperate door knock with weeks to go is going to convince them to vote. In fact, that impersonal last minute appeal may only confirm to them that we actually, since we never talked to them before, don't really care about them, or we never really even listened to them. So I think a much more ongoing community based organizing with respected leaders of our communities and incorporate it into the Democratic Party through your, precinct level positioning is a much more is something we have to do much better. I do know that on the information, and this is something again you would know more about than I do, but I do think we have to be much more on offense about getting our message out, social media and otherwise. The Republicans have done this very well. I know they've done this well with Latino voters. I know they've done this with Black voters. That they are hyper targeting with messages that are either pro their candidates or very anti-democratic candidates. And if all people hear is that, and then we come along with 2 weeks ago having taken a lot for granted, don't forget to show up, we're just not competing. So I think we have to do a much better job of being smart about getting into information spaces and getting on message. So those are some of the things, and I think these are true for a lot, but I think in particular, this has been a problem with Latino voters, and you'll see it through lower turnout in margins that weren't as good as they need to be if we're going to win.
Low turnout, and then also a lot of Latinos who voted for Trump, right? The
Yep.
largest percentage,
Yep.
46% overall Latino population, 55% of Latino men.
Yep.
And part of that was this feeling of we don't like what's going on. We don't know who's good and who's bad. There's too much disinformation in English and Spanish. And the fact is that do need to get back as Democrats to being part of that big tent party that is able to pull those people in, even as we hold on to our values. Because at the end of the day, we don't need to step away from our values to be able to pull those folks in. We just need to be more effective with the messaging and
Yeah.
also the tactics, and certainly year round organizing. I like what you said about local groups, because as a national organization that has a footprint in many communities. Last year we had races we were working through in 19 states. We constantly work with local groups, and
Yeah.
certainly local messengers, those WhatsApp groups, those coffee clutches, the guys that are playing dominoes, are really the breeding ground for how people feel and how people vote, right?
Yeah.
As it relates to politics. Um,
And they're not necessarily political groups. They're naturally
no.
in the community, and when they speak politics, for that reason, it's probably more listened to. I was at a couple conferences last fall where groups were so frustrated. We see $1 billion, sorry. We see $1 billion flying to super PACs for TV ads, but then groups that are the kind of group we're talking about begging for any dollars to do what we're talking about. And I think if we did a better job earlier on with local groups connected to community, we wouldn't need as much TV at the end because we would already be in the conversation. So I think that's a longer term adjustment we have to make.
Yes, and to that point, though, I think tactics again matters, because the fact is that people don't get their news in the way they used to get their news 20 years ago, right? They don't necessarily wait for the 10 o'clock or the 11 o'clock to figure out what's going on in the world. They're getting their news constantly. And so reaching people where they're at, not just with the correct messaging, but also in terms of, like you said, those groups that maybe have nothing to do with politics, is part of the work that needs to lie ahead. As a chairman of a party, what advice do you have for them as we move forward into the 2026 election?
I mean, my best advice, and I don't sit around and think that I did everything well, perfectly either. I think there's a lot to do, but I think getting into the communication channels that are beyond the traditional right now is really important. I think Republicans have done far better than we have of late, getting into all sorts of other conversations that, again, aren't even necessarily thought of as political, but the right wing messaging went through. And the other is, the lowest hanging fruit, I think, in politics is potentially precinct organizing. Um, this doesn't cost millions of dollars. If every single person who is elected anywhere in Ohio or other states, and these are elections to be the precinct leader or the ward leader, whatever you call it. If every one of them saw that not as an invitation to go to a regular meeting and to vote to endorse a candidate, but also realize it's a responsibility to organize your community all the time, to know which Democrats live there, to know who might be an apartment building captain, to make sure that people who live in an apartment building behind the closed doors have someone on the inside who's giving them the voter registration information, take ownership of each precinct. If 30% of people in America who were a precinct captain did that, election outcomes would change because not even 30% do it now. If 50% would do it, we would have much bigger turnout. So I think it's harder to do this, but with technology today, if we had, and this would mean that also the precinct level person, if they were doing this on an ongoing basis, we wouldn't just be knocking on a Latino voter's door with 2 weeks to go. That precinct person would have been talking to that voter the entire year. And so a candidate knocking on the door with a week to go, I hope, would be told, "Oh, our precinct leader told us about you months ago because we've been doing it steadily." So I think that's a really important. I think if every party chair, some parties can raise a lot. There's no reason why every single county party in America isn't saying to precinct level organizers, hey, let's organize your neighborhood and let's get it started right away. Not in the year of the election, but long before. That would change outcomes overnight if we did it really seriously.
I agree. And I know that, for example, our new Democratic chair, Ken Martin, has announced a very serious investment in the states to the tune of millions of dollars on a monthly basis to get support to those state chairs so they can do the type of organizing you're talking about. Now, operationally, always that's a little easier said than done because I know there are some county chairs and some county chairs and some state chairs and some state chairs. So, in terms of operationally how that works, I think it'd be interesting to explain to people what mechanics you see happening because here's the bottom line, and I know that this was one of the more powerful uh messages in your book around how, many voters who are disaffected, who perhaps feel like that politics doesn't relate to them, um, are going to be very hard to reach.
Yeah.
So operationally, how do you envision that happening?
Yeah, and this is again, it goes back. Well, to me, it's about the mindset. So when I was chair of the party, and this didn't work as well as I would have liked, but it was the right idea. When someone would win, again, these precinct level people are elected. I would say to my team, can you give me the list of everyone in Ohio, the hundreds and hundreds of them who just won their precinct election? And I would write them a letter and I would say, congratulations, you've won your precinct election. Now let's start organizing your community. And so we need to change the mindset that level, that precinct level person is an organizer. They own their neighborhood. They know everything going on in it. So once you do that, the operational stuff follows. But right now, for too long, that hasn't even been the mindset. It's been, well, I go to a meeting every few months, and every once in a while there's an endorsement, and that's kind of that. But the
And
reason I like,
In New York, we call them district leaders.
yeah,
And I believe me when I tell you, I've had to fight with them tooth and nail to do exactly the kind of work that you're talking about.
yeah,
Part of it is resource. These are, for the most part, unpaid positions.
yeah,
So folks, like everyone else, have to work and take care of their
correct,
families. And so in their mind, this is an additional job I have to do.
yeah,
That's not necessarily what I signed up for. So I think, to your point, we also need to start thinking about who those district leaders, precinct leaders are as we recruit them to run for these
yeah,
positions. Because although they're not paid positions, we really, as a party, need to start bringing in the kind of hungry, fresh blood that is going to be willing to do the kind of work you
yeah.
talk about.
And what I put in this is part of my first book is if you're in a district, in a precinct, or your ones in New York, whatever you call them, if you're in one and your leader doesn't seem to be doing it, call them up and say, hey, I live in the precinct. Can I help you do it? I think we should be organizing. I'm here to help. And if they somehow, this is going to cause a little problem, maybe, but if they're like, no, we don't want to do that, well, then run against them. But the first step isn't to say you're terrible. It's to say, I live in this precinct and I want to help you take ownership over organizing it. So one way or another, the reason this is so important is because this is at the local level where the numbers are manageable. In Ohio, we're talking 400 or 500 people, maybe half of them are Democrats. So you could put your arms around that number of people. And if you do that really, really well broadly, like I said, outcomes would change. If everyone can get 10% more people of their precinct, which at that level is 20 people, 30 people, maybe less, that changes outcomes. We just need a different mindset. And the other thing to your point, because I think this is a really good point, the reason this is so important is if you do it this way, you have time to get to the disaffected voters.
Correct.
You're the best person to convince them that it does matter. The knock on door with 3 weeks to go, if they've never heard from you, if they think politics has not been good for their life, some stranger telling them with 2 weeks to go, oh my God, don't forget to vote, isn't changing that at all. But a neighbor who 9 months before said, I'm your local precinct person. I'd like to introduce myself. I'd like to understand what's going on in your life. Come to a picnic we're having in a month. That person has the time to have the more meaningful conversation to get a lot of Americans who do not believe democracy is working for them to see that participating is better than not. That's why I love that. And again, this is not just precinct, going back to community groups. I
Right.
think different community groups can do the same thing. They have the time. They're not stuck on the election cycle to have the kind of meaningful conversations that convince people who've checked out of democracy for reasons that for them could make a lot of sense to get them back in and see that we're all better off if they participate.
Thank you for that, David. And I should tell you, a lot of our followers are grassroots organizers, which is why I wanted to make sure we covered a little bit of your thoughts on how we really make this work, because this is a time in our lives where none of us can sit it out. So we're running into time. Are there any final thoughts that you would like to share? For those who joined late, thank you. This is Catherine Pichardo, President and CEO of Latino Victory. We are delighted to be joined by David Pepper, and we've been having a great conversation around democracy and how we get our country back in shape. So, David, can you please share with us any final thoughts you
Yeah,
might
I'll close and amid all the problems, we all got to keep going. And what we do, we are in the same moment that every generation of Americans has been in. We thought maybe for a time that we were the first generation of Americans that didn't have to worry and fight for the health of our democracy. We were wrong to think that. We are the same as abolitionists. We are the same as suffragists. We're the same as civil rights heroes. We if we thought we were the exception, well, guess what? We were wrong. That gives our life a lot more meaning right now than we ever may have imagined. I find that inspiring, even though it's sobering. At the same time, history tells us that not only are we in the same battle, not only did people before us overcome hurdles bigger than we face, but what we do in the next 2 years will determine, I believe, if we are stuck in this moment of anti-democracy and lawless, hell that we're in for 40
have.
years or for 4 years or 2 years. The history makes it very clear that if you fight back early before it all settles in, you can stop the moment of darkness early. If you kind of quit or you don't fight hard or you let them double and triple down through 26 and 28 and 30, and I have an 8 and 11-year-old, our kids will be left for decades fighting this battle. So
Hmm.
our fight right now, the next year and a half, the 26 state house races, Congress races, school board races, that's our opportunity to fight back. And if we do it well, we can minimize the damage that is happening. And the last thing I'll say is, and there's an opportunity with this, as they always do, they are overreaching. We are seeing it we're seeing that the Americans see that, whether it's the response to this mass deportation, just horror. We're already seeing Americans recoil. This is amid the horror. The only good news is Americans are showing at least a majority, not as big as I'd like. They don't like what they're seeing. Just
Hmm.
like they don't like the attacks on Medicaid. They don't like the attacks on food security. They don't like the bigger deficit because we're giving money to billionaires. So not only do we have an opportunity to minimize the damage the next 2 years, but with their overreach, if we really go to town beginning state level up and run in more places and run on those issues, I think we have an opportunity of 26 to fight back very quickly, even though right now feels tough. So that's what keeps me going every day, and knowing that past Americans have had to overcome even more than we face right now. So thank you for having me. It's really nice to talk to you. And I'd love to keep working together. You could probably educate me on so much that I could then help share as well. So thank you.
We have a lot more to talk about. So certainly I will take you up on that. Thank you, David. For those watching, please subscribe to Latino Victory's channel, David Pepper's channel. There's a lot more to come. We are not sitting this one out. Thank you and have a good day. Bye
Thanks.
bye.
Take care, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Bye bye.